Hey everybody, happy Friday. I want to show you a video today about the patch application, or the patch function rather. And it's in this application, and what we're going to highlight is a common challenge that I see that comes up from time to time, not always. So before we get too deep into the video, let me preface this by saying we're going to use the patch function. This form and the form examples that I'm going to give you have nothing to do with a form. Okay, we're just using fields on a screen and a button to submit that data. We're going to use the patch function to do all of that. So if you're not familiar with patch, stop watching this video right now. I will be making a video about patch in the future, but until that happens, please go ahead and watch several videos. April Dunham is a great YouTuber out there that she's with Microsoft and creates a lot of great content. Shane Young, of course, goes without saying. If you've watched any of the Power App videos, Shane one of Power 911 out there, he's very, very popular. Daniel Christensen's a great one, and let's not forget Reza Durrani, who's also excellent out there. So they've got a plethora of videos that you can already go ahead and watch. And I try to create videos to kind of fill in the gap and or enhance certain areas, or go maybe in a little deeper in one areas. In some cases, it may be a repeat. But this particular issue is writing data across two tables using a patch statement. So while they cover it, I'm going to cover a little nuanced version of it. Okay, so with the assumption you know how to use patch, and with the assumption that you've seen or you've run into a problem where you need to write data across table, then this is what we're going to do. So on the left side, we've got personal detail information, that's table 1. On the right side, we've got address information, that's table 2. But if we use this as an example, this video is going to get quite long. So I have a second screen that really boils this down into just, still two tables, still using a patch statement, but we're only going to have to write one column of data to make this video as short as we can. Okay? So the field here collecting the first name, essentially, this is going to be written to the top table called just first, right? And then we have a phone number, and this is going to be written to table 2, which is on the bottom. And all these are our two SharePoint lists. Okay, so to be fair, in this particular one, I did create one custom column called first name ID. The rest of it, the ID is always there, but it's not shown by default. You do get the title that is there by default, but to show the ID on screen, I just clicked add column down to here, show hide columns, found ID, put a tick in the tick box, and then for the first name, I just went ahead and added a column. I think I did a data type number, and then at that point, I added that in there because the ID over here is numeric. All right, so that's that table. And then for the other table, the first name is very simple. I didn't add anything. I'm just using it pretty much as it is, but I did choose in my SharePoint list here to go ahead and show the ID. And you may notice that I'm using Microsoft lists. Okay, so what this is essentially a SharePoint list, but it's just a, if you look in your tenant, essentially has your tenant ID, and then there's just a group of lists, okay? And so all you do, you just keep adding lists and more lists and more lists. And so I tend to like this a little bit better in using them with the Power Apps and having to go and create a SharePoint site and then create a list in the SharePoint site. You could still get to all of that advanced list features and list stuff in here. So if you go into list settings here, this will be very familiar with what you may see in a SharePoint list. So in any event, don't want to turn this into a video about SharePoint. In any event, let's go back to where we wanted to highlight today, and this is the columns for the first and the phone number. Now you may be thinking, how do I go ahead and do this? So no magic at all here, right? Standard input text boxes for both. The magic all happens under the save button, and I'm going to show you how I see this happen more often than not. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the code. When somebody clicks submit or save after they filled in 2 bits of information about first and phone number, what happens? So if we start at the top, first thing that they're doing is we're going to capture the text from the first name or from the name field, and you're going to put that in a variable. And the reason that you're going to go ahead and put this in a variable is because we're going to refer to this later. And so what happens is now what they do is they patch off to the first name table using the defaults function to signify that they're doing an insert of a new row. They're adding in the value from the first name field. All of that's well and good, but you may be again wondering why they're storing the value to the text field off into this variable. And the reason for that is this part of the code that's really unoptimized, okay? But nonetheless, this is another call back to the same database that we just wrote. So now what we're going to attempt to do, and this is also high risk, especially in a high transaction application. And the reason I say that is because essentially what we're doing is we're storing off the value in this var f name variable, and we're using that essentially to go back to that same data set or that same table, and we're going to filter that entire list in hopes that we get one record value. Okay, so this is problem number one. This may return more than one record because it's not a unique ID. It's not the row ID. It's essentially all it is a value. Well, what if I got, for first name, what if I got 2 Davids or 2 Bobs or 2 Anns or 2 Sues or 2, whatever of the same? This is kind of bad code, right? But nonetheless, I do see a lot of this happening. And so ultimately what they're doing is they're doing all of this to return what they hope is a single record or single value. And even if they force the first function, there's no guarantee that that's the right record, right? So continuing along with this high-risk code, then what they do is they patch out to the second table all of the information, and then what they do is they grab out from the previous query, because right here when they circle back they're creating another variable, and this is basically a temp record. And so now they're bringing back all of the columns that are associated with that record as it is in SharePoint, or in the SharePoint list, or the table, or wherever it's stored off in, right? And then over here what they're doing is they're having to force that first function just to ensure that this is only going to be the first table. And then what they're doing is they're specifically naming out the ID here so that they can insert that ID as the relation key. So this may sound odd, but nonetheless, let's run this and you'll kind of get to see this in action. And by the way, the rest of the code from that point forward down, essentially all it's doing is resetting the fields down here and then resetting the focus to the first. So I'll put my name in here, David. Right, and we'll do 555-1212. This is a number they use on television all the time, right? And so I'll just hit save. And so, boom, watch what happens. So I got this number 18, which in this very simple use case, this works, but this could be problematic again. And we'll see this in just a minute, right? So let's go ahead and see what happened here. So David got written to the first table, which is good. And then the ID comes from SharePoint because it's an internal auto-numbered list, right? And so then I'm returning back 18 because I'm going back and circling back and trying to figure out what that was based on the value that was written here into this particular field. And so I got the right number. I got 18. But if I were to go ahead and put David in again, and I would go put 666-3333 and save, watch what happens. Problem. 18 and 18. Okay, so now we usually have an unexpected bug that usually comes out into production because usually in some certain key cases there's not enough data behind the scenes in the app to test it until it gets into production, and this is where users start to get frustrated. So there's got to be a better, cleaner way to deal with this, and there absolutely is. Let me show you the fix to this problem. So number one, we'll eliminate this incorrect data being written, and we're going to capture off this ID on insert so that what happens is we always get the right number. Okay, so let's go ahead and bomb out of this. Now let's go on a rampage of changing all of the code behind the scenes here again. All right, so let's get into the save button, and now I've got this code changed out over here. Okay, so let's grab all of this here. And let's essentially blow all this away. And let's do this here. All right. So I'm doing this entire operation in two separate writes. I'm not circling back. I'm not creating extra variables that I don't need, that is unnecessary. I've simplified the entire operation into two patch statements, okay? But what I've done here, and this is the magic to the entire thing here that I want to show you. The first patch statement, I'm encapsulating that inside of a set temp rec. I'm still using that same temp rec, right? But what happens is, oops, actually, let me go ahead and fix this other formula that's wrong. This is empty, works on a table, but in this particular case, I need it to work on a record. So I'm going to do is blank for this particular operation, and I don't need to worry about the first, and I don't need to worry about the ID because I am getting the ID, which I'll circle back and I'll show you that right now. All right, so what we've got going on here is I still have the patch statement, right? But the interesting thing is I'm capturing, and I guess this is the part that most developers don't know. Patch, after you've patched, if you capture the results of the patch like I'm doing here, so you got to put it inside of a set, or you got to set it inside of an update context or something, right? Or even a collection. As long as you do that, you'll capture what was done in the patch statement, including, magically, believe it or not, the ID that the database writes to itself. So in this case, SharePoint's doing the heavy lifting, and on insert, it's creating an ID. So I get that, right? So I wrote the patch statement, but after the patch statement, outside of the patch statement, so if we look at this last closing brace, right? Let's go over here, and you see over here that this is the beginning of the patch. So this .id is outside of the patch statement. And so because it's outside of the patch statement, it's actually going to belong to where I'm setting the temp rec. So essentially then what I'm storing off into this variable is just the ID for the row that I set in. And so I don't have to do first, I don't have to do nothing. Essentially it's one value, one numeric value, and that's it, right? So this solves all of our problems. And it's done by creatively nesting in a patch to the value of what would be the variable, and then outside of the patch just do a dot to grab the ID. So whatever database you're working on, just do a dot, whatever the unique ID essentially is for that particular table is what you'll do. So with that being said, then on your subsequent patch to the second table, all you have to do right here, first name ID equals, and I just have to refer to the variable because the variable just has just the ID. Super clean, really nice. And so now with this in place, let's go ahead and run this code again. And I'm going to use that same David. So now we've got 3 records in here, and watch what doesn't happen. So this time let's do 888-4444. Let's hit save. And bada bing, I got 20, 20, and 20. See, code works so much better, so much cleaner. So now hopefully you know how to take data, split it across multiple tables by doing a nice unified consolidated patch statement, but encapsulating that inside of a variable so that you can specifically on the outside of the patch bring back just that ID because you're going to need that as its reference. And so you can think about a really complicated data set that you may have on screen where you've got lots of tables, maybe a really great database design in third normal form, and you've got lots of data tables in there, and you have to keep capturing the previous reference to the previous ID. So you just, would keep stacking essentially all of this information up to continue to maintain the referential integrity of the data as you're doing it through the insert. So hopefully this video was helpful to you, and now you know how to link data tables in a better and more concise way. And that's it for this video. We'll see you in the next one. Have a great one. Bye-bye.